Okay, welcome everybody to today's meeting of City York Council's Area Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Hollier. I'm the chair of the committee. I'm joined on my right by Gareth Arnold, who's the council's development manager. On the left by Jane Mellor, democracy officer, and Rahina Chowdhury, who's one of the senior solicitors. Members of the committee are down both sides, just so everybody knows who we are. We've got quite a few apologies today. So we've got Councillor Carr substituting for Councillor Galvin, so welcome. And then we've got apologies without substitutions for Councillor Melly, Councillor Orrell and Councillor Wardley. So we're a little light on numbers today, but I'm sure we'll manage. We can move on then to the agenda and just whether there's any declarations of interest from members. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair. It's more by way of explanation than a declaration of interest, but I think it's at your discretion as to whether I am asked to wear a mask or not. I do have a fairly severe hearing disability, which a mask only makes more difficult. So if you'd allow me not to wear one, I'd be grateful.
Of course. Councillor Daubney.
Thank you, Chair. In the interest of complete transparency, I'd like to declare that as in the register of interest, I let out 2 rooms in my home. It's not, of course, an HMO, so and I don't consider myself at all predetermined. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't see any more declarations, so we can move. So there aren't any sort of general speakers under the public participation section, and the minutes of the last meeting aren't ready yet. So I think we can move straight onto the plans list. First up then is 3A, which is 18 Beech Avenue.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is, the proposal is a 2-storey side extension, single-storey rear extension, porch to the front and a dormer to the rear. On the screen are the existing elevations and the as proposed elevations. Just let me get the pointer. So here's a 2-storey extension from the front elevation and the proposed porch. Members will note that the 2-storey extension goes slightly beyond the existing rear wall and then extends further at ground floor. That line there is the existing side wall of the property. It's marginally set back from the front, set down from the ridge. It's set away from the boundary by about 0.8 of a metre. Very narrow, and it is narrow at the front, but the garden tapers, so they use that in order to widen the extension out when it gets to the rear. So the rear elevation shows this separate single-storey element here, which is here. First, the new side extension projects slightly out, and then this gable feature with a rear bedroom window there. And the proposal is also for a dormer, which sits within the existing roof slope. Got some photographs for members who weren't able to make the virtual site visit. Property from the front. From the rear, attached dwelling to the other side. Some photographs from the rear as well. So this is from number 8, the orchard, which if members look on page 7 of the agenda papers, you'll see there's a property directly to the rear. And this is from number 6, the orchard. So the application property is in there. The applicant, the neighbour has also sent a couple of photographs that are taken from their upper floor windows of number 6. This might have a telephoto on it, so bear that in mind. So this is the application site side extension will go in there. And these are from the first floor, 2 of the 3 first floor rear facing bedroom windows of number 6. And that's from the ground floor, just be outside the extended ground floor of number 8. So I'll take you back to the proposals, unless members want to see any of those photographs or drawings again.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, could you just go back? There's a photograph from the garden of the application property looking back towards the house.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. Just to be clear, where on the left-hand side of that photograph, where the kind of pole seems to lean on the garage, there's the 2 windows there. So would I be correct that that pole is approximately the boundary line, and so the half of the garage is removed?
Yeah, it's a store, but it's jointly built and straddles the boundary, so they will have to negotiate with the neighbour about how that's dealt with and how that's finished.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any further questions for Gareth? Councillor Crackle?
Yeah, thank you. I may just be missing this entirely, but can you just clarify the materials for the whole of the extensions and whatever? I read the bit that said they changed the materials for the dormer, so they would just be matching existing. Does that apply to the rest of it?
Yeah, there is a condition on page 6, so the materials to be used externally should be as stated on the planning application form. It doesn't help.
It says for all
So
of it,
my understanding, and I double check that, is that it's to be finished in brick and tile to match the existing.
Right, thank you. And can I have another question? I know it's got the usual first condition, but I'm just not sure. Can you clarify? Is the layout as we're seeing it on here, is that conditioned, particularly for the ground floor?
Not normally, unless there were particular reason to do so, generally because every other house has you have the right to use whichever room in whichever part of your house for whatever purpose you see fit. But I would say it would have to be getting on for exceptional circumstances before we said room A had to be a kitchen or room B had to be a bathroom or something like that.
Right. I was just wondering about the potential for another bedroom on the ground floor.
On the ground floor,
Yeah.
I guess you could potentially you could reorder so you had a bedroom.
Not easily.
It would,
yeah.
it would be. It wouldn't be so obvious how to do that. You would, but I guess you could do it. Convert that one, but.
So that one there, is that just a hall?
I think it's.
Where you've got your cursor now?
Yeah, it's not denoted as anything in particular.
And that's the
Domestic
extension,
room.
is it?
That's the ground floor part of the extension of the rear. Yeah.
It's just a hallway. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 5.14. Just looking if you can clarify that last sentence, because obviously the concern raised by neighbours is overlooking. It says there is a side window towards the front of 16 Beech Avenue in the side elevation. However, it is felt that the proposals will not impact on this window. Just a little bit of clarification. Which window is it talking about there? Which way is it looking? You know, what's
Well, 16 Beech Avenue is.
Obviously next door to 18. Yeah.
And I would imagine
Sorry. So that sentence says there is a side window towards the front to the, and this is the bit that's getting me. It's a side window. I assume that means on 18, the proposal, towards the front of 16 Beech Avenue, or is that a window on the side of the, right, okay.
sorry, there's a side window on number 16
Yeah,
towards the front, which sorry, I didn't look at it today, but I would say it's the mirror of the one I'm marking there.
okay, thank you.
So on the flip side of the boundary, so around about here. There.
Okay, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. One of the neighbours has complained about a potential objection on the grounds of potential parking. Could you just clarify exactly how many car parking spaces are left after this development has taken place, please?
Well, it's not marked out, but the frontage is the frontage has flags, but also gravel.
Yeah.
There were 3 cars parked there today, as far as I recall, and the porch extends out by a little over 1.1 meters, I think, at the front. So I don't think it will have a material impact on the amount of parking.
And the amount of parking would still be compliant with our policy on a dwelling of this size, would it?
Yeah, if it was it's a bit difficult. It's not that straightforward with in terms of extensions. Our policies don't seek additional parking spaces, for example. With a 1, 2, 3, 4-bedroomed house on a new estate, you'd be saying 1 or 2 spaces. Yeah,
Thank you.
depending on its accessibility.
Thank you. That clarifies that.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I'm just looking at the pictures that you've got up there. On the first floor plan, what are those C-shaped bits? So you've got the sort of the new extension, and then between, just immediately inside the existing dwelling.
These.
Yeah, those. What is that?
I think they're wardrobes, walk-in wardrobes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, when I first looked at the drawings a couple of weeks ago, I looked at that, and I'm pretty sure it's a bit blurry, but my recollection is that was a W, which I think is a wardrobe.
Okay, can't see any further. Councillor Carr.
Just a very small question, really. It's a bit of an awkwardly shaped extension. Of course, that's dictated by the shape of the side. But have there been any other extensions that you know of, Gareth, on the same road that have adopted this approach?
Not. Sorry, not that I'm aware of. Just go to the. So this one I think is 12. That has a side extension, but its boundary runs almost parallel. And these properties have been extended to the side as well. But again, it doesn't have this. It doesn't have this this angled boundary between the two properties, which takes into account the curve of the street. It's not, it's unusual, but we've certainly had extensions elsewhere which use that taper of the boundary and to maximise the floor space that they get. That's for sure.
Okay, I think we can move on then to our public speakers, who are Dal Singh and Asha Lander, who are the agents for the applicant, joining via Zoom. So I'm hoping you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Hoping you can hear us as well.
Yeah, we can hear you, and you've got 3 minutes to address the committee, and I'll give you a warning. It's about 30 seconds, but if you'd like to make a start in your own time.
Okay, that's perfect. Evening, everybody. I'd just like to answer a few queries that were raised by your panel there. One of the ladies talked about the ground floor, the open area. I believe the client's use for that is an office. I don't know whether that, I know it's not shown in his office, but the client's use for that area would be an office. And upstairs, the U-shaped, they are indeed walk-in wardrobes. And one of the other questions was, there was talk about a side window. There's no side windows on this proposed extension as well. So I just thought I'd just clarify them points as well. There's no additional increase in occupancy at the house, so we can't see any further requirements for any additional parking in that respect as well. Obviously, we've considered this application quite extensively. You also briefly touched, one of the panels spoke about any other extensions that are similar to this, but actually number 12 is indeed similar to this. It's actually a bigger dormer, and it does run down the side of the boundary on an angle. So it's actually almost identical to this proposed extension. That's number 12. There's been various concerns regarding windows, rear dormer windows. There's 3 windows in the rear dormers, one of which is a bathroom window, so it will have obscured glass. The middle window in the top dormer is in fact a window above the staircase going up, so you can't actually see out the window. It just lets light in. So the only window that you can look out on is a bedroom window in the dormer. The Velux that's in the other roof area, again, is just a roof window to just to let actual light in. There's obviously quite an extensive back garden to this property. It's over 200 square meters, and there's quite a lot of vegetation within that garden as well, in terms of to screen any views or any sight lines from the first floor on the dormer. There is some quite extensive vegetation in the garden as well. And as I said, it's circa 200 square meters. So there's quite an open area as well. We've reduced the side extension to allow access all the way around. I know you briefly spoke about that. There's circa 800 millimeters allowed around the side of the actual building.
30 seconds left, thank you.
And again, the materials will be matched, they'll be the same. We've reduced the ridge height to make it look subservient to the original building. And that's about it really, but I would draw yourselves to number 12 again, because it is a like-for-like extension, just slightly smaller. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. If you could just hang on, I'll just ask if the committee have got any questions for you at this point. I can't see any, so I'll thank you for your time this evening. You should be able to continue watching on the council's YouTube channel, but thank you.
Thank
you. Okay, are there any further questions for Gareth? Not. Happy then to move into debate. I think there is one change to a condition, which might be worth just mentioning now.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the question that Councillor Crankill about the materials do refer to at the top of page 5. The plan's been changed, so the extension to be built with brick and the dormer to have tiles which match the existing roof. I read out the proposed condition on condition 3 on page 6. That needs to be changed because the planning application form refers to the previously proposed materials. So I need to change that to reflect the change to the proposals midway through the application process. The implication of that will be that it's brick and tile.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fisher, I saw first, and Councillor Crawshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I had a good look at the supplementary planning guidance document on extensions, and I couldn't really see a reason why this application couldn't be approved. It's plenty of parking. It's an unusual shape, but it fits the size of the plot, and it allows for bins to be taken down the side of the house and stored. I looked at the overlooking, it's far the distance between this house and the ones at the rear is far in excess of many other developments we've approved. So I'm quite happy to move approval of it.
Thank you. Just ask if there's anybody willing to second that, Councillor Crawshaw.
Yeah, I was going to make similar points, and I'm happy to second it. I think the overlooking is it's a long way from the rear property, but also I think, as was just explained, there's only actually one window that could really be looked out of, and I think that's probably the furthest away of all of the ones that may cause any overlooking. So I don't think I have any qualms about seconding approval.
Yeah, thank you. Any further debates? Can't see any. So Gareth, you could just give us a quick summary, and then I'll move to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. So the recommendation, and it's been moved, that permission is granted subject to the conditions in on page 6 of the agenda, subject to that change to condition 3 as earlier described.
Okay, thank you. So if I could see then all those in favour of the proposal. Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, so that is approved. We'll just need to take a quick 5-minute break to let in a public speaker. So if we could be back for 5 o'clock. Okay, thank you and welcome back, everybody. Move on then to item 3B, 19 Hambleton Avenue.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for change of use from a dwelling house in C3 use to a house in multiple occupation, C4 use. Property address is 19 Hambleton Avenue. It's just off the corner with Osbaldwick Lane. Property in the centre shot there. Currently, it's a 3-bedroom house. They're proposing 3 bedrooms, including the conversion of the ground floor reception room into a bedroom. I believe the study, which is currently a bedroom, would be too small to be a bedroom within an HMO. But as members will be aware, we grant permission within the C4 use class, which, although as you say, was 3 bedrooms, could lawfully, under planning controls, be occupied by up to 6 residents.
Okay, are there any initial questions, Councillor Crawshaw?
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to clarify just a couple of issues around the data and around the calculation of the percentages of HMOs, because paragraph 3.1 says there are currently 5 HMOs out of 58 dwellings. And then to paragraph 5.5, which is setting out policy H8, it talks about a neighbourhood area where less than 20% of the properties are exempt from paying council tax because they are entirely occupied by full-time students or HMOs and various other things. So I wanted just to be clear that that figure at 3.1 may not necessarily include properties that are fully exempted from paying council tax. Because there just seems to be a slight discrepancy between the way in which we're counting HMOs. So I just wanted to understand that. And then the other part, which also is about how we're counting HMOs, the distinction between the street level area and the neighbourhood area, and obviously the neighbourhood area being a wider area. But I think one of the objections to this one is around a concentration of HMOs together at the top end of Hambleton Avenue. And I just wanted to understand where we count the street level when we're calculating that figure versus the neighbourhood level. So neighbourhood, I presume, is a number of surrounding streets. If it's street level, is it just the houses on Hambleton Avenue, or what I think it is, which is houses within 100 metres of the applicant property? But if you could just clarify those points, that would just be really helpful.
So the first point, on our database, which has been double checked against council tax data and HMO licensing data, there are, not including this property, there are currently 5 HMOs. So they can be student exemptions, caught by student exemptions, or licensing, or planning permission, certificates of lawfulness. In terms of that's the measure. So that's the 100 metres. That's the 100 metres of the property. So all those ones in grey are counted, and then the percentage of 5 is calculated. I don't have the neighbourhood. I don't have the neighbourhood map, I'm afraid. But it runs to, yes, almost 1,600 dwellings.
That's fine. That's really helpful, really clear. I just wanted to be really clear about understanding what the figures are actually telling us. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Carr?
Thank you, Chair. My question is related to Councillor Crawshaw's, and it's about the accuracy of the database generally. As Gareth has already said, there are two factors determining the database. One is the council tax records, and the other one is HMO licensing. Now, presumably HMO licensing depends on a declaration by the owner, and council tax records, again, the owner may not admit that it's an HMO. So is there a possibility that the number of HMOs, particularly in this area near the university, are actually greater than is being suggested?
It's not going to be perfect, because there may well be properties which are used as HMOs that we're not aware of. The supplementary planning document acknowledges that, but it's as good as we can get with the data that we have. So there's student exemptions, planning permissions, licensing, certificates of lawfulness, but then also when we get planning applications, people do question the figures, and we can look into specific allegations of properties which are alleged to be being used as HMOs, which don't appear on our database, which has happened with this particular property, and we've looked into those, and we, as far as we can be, we're satisfied that the database is as accurate as it can be.
If I may, Chair, but it could be out, Gareth, by a margin of, say, 10%, could it?
I don't think I can say that.
Okay. Leading question.
It rather depends on. It always depends on how densely packed the houses are, because the percentages. It depends how many houses are included in that 100 metre measure.
Okay. Any further questions? Can't see any, so I think we can move then on to our public speaker, who's Councillor Waters, who's joining us by phone. So if you could let me know, Councillor Waters, that you can hear us.
Hello, am I through?
Hi, yep, we can hear you.
Right, thanks, Chair.
Yep, you'll be away.
Just for clarity, members, this should be a retrospective application, as the application property is already in use and apparently on the council's so-called database, presumably on the basis of a council tax exemption. As the main determining factor in these applications, indeed the only one it now seems, is the percentage threshold of HMOs. So within 100 yards of the application property, there are student HMOs directly opposite number 19, with 4 properties in a row, one further HMO further down Hambleton Avenue that at one time had 11 migrant workers squeezed into it, along with 2 other HMOs on Osbaldwick Lane, one with students and one that has subsequently ceased that use. Along with these, the property next to the application property is in use as an unauthorised HMO, and even if enforcement action is taken expediently, that situation, given appeals and the like, is unlikely to change for a few years. I am quite clear that the 10% street level threshold is breached before the current HMO usage of number 19 is taken into account. Of the 4 properties in a row directly opposite, one, presumably because of the uncertainty over students returning to York during the pandemic, has been rented to a family in the last few months. And as very quickly, this long-term HMO has been taken off the council's usually out-of-date database. although officers would consider, according to recent correspondence this week, such a change as to not be an intent to abandon the C4 use, and therefore this property will likely simply revert back to HMO student use in the future, further undermining this residential street. I note with interest the planning officer's unevidenced assertion in paragraph 5.12 as to retrospective approval of number 19 as a HMO, breaching the 10% street level threshold, but as it's only marginal, it's not material. Now that's a bad enough statement in a street where the council have an accurate picture of HMO levels, but in a street where they don't, and are willfully ignoring the presence of other HMOs, it's even worse. I note with interest the condition regarding a management plan. I'll cover such conditions more with the next agenda item, but suffice to say, this is just chocolate fireguard legislation that is meaningless, surrounding council tax-paying residents, and is frequently unenforced by this council. I note with interest the debate earlier, or the questions earlier regarding the council's database. I do hope councillors are aware of the recent critical local government ombudsman comments on the council's student database. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I'll just ask if members have got any questions at this point. I can't see any, so I'll thank you for your time on this item, Councillor Waters, and we'll see you back shortly for the second item. Thank you. So if we can move on then, if there are any further questions for Gareth. If not, I'm happy to move. Sorry.
I just wondered if you wanted to, question myself. I feel left out. The point Councillor Waters made about the property that had reverted from an HMO to a family occupied dwelling, and the exchange of correspondence. The correspondence was making a general point. It wasn't making a specific point about this particular property and the whether the HMO use has been abandoned. So in terms of planning law, a change of use from C4 to C3 is permitted development. So they can change from an HMO to a dwelling house occupied by a single household without the need for planning permission. So we're not aware of that change unless it flags up when we do a review of the database and it falls off because it's not noted as an HMO anymore. And that seems to be what's happened in the case of the property within this 100 metres. Now, the issue that Councillor Waters raised was, well, what if it just reverts back to an HMO? But of course, to change the use from C3 to C4 requires planning permission. So strictly speaking, they would be required to apply if at the end of the current tenancy agreement, they wanted to let it as an HMO. The issue about intent to abandon was a slightly more high level discussion about circumstances where that might not apply. And we discussed issues such as just a temporary let to a friend or something like that, where we might not have considered that to be a change of use. But on the face of it, which is as far as I can go at the moment, there has been an act that changes the use back to C3, and which is why that property doesn't exist on the HMO database.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fisher?
So can I just clarify, from my figures I've got here, we have 3 HMOs on the other side of the road, a further property which had 11 migrants, but apparently doesn't seem to have now, one with students which has now ceased, and one unlicensed HMO. So that would mean with this one, it'd be a total of 6, which would still be 10.3%. So what you're saying is that if the situation was that the people who have reverted to a C3 use, want it to apply, they would then breach the actual neighbourhood limit, potentially breach the neighbourhood limit. So therefore, there could be an issue with granting planning permission at that.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. There might be unintended consequences, but we are where we are.
Okay, any further questions? If not, if we're happy then to move into debate, open it up if anybody would like to make a start. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not happy to approve this for two principal reasons. One is that there is considerable uncertainty about the accuracy of the HMO database. And secondly, the property occupies rather a prominent position on this estate at a road junction. And it's slightly elevated, if I understand the photograph well enough, just a little bit higher than street level, which I think will exacerbate key issues of parking or additional parking, refuse management, noise, disturbance, etc. So I'm not happy in my own mind to support this approval. Thank you.
Okay, any further debate? Councillor, sorry, I was going to say Councillor Melly, but Councillor Webb.
Turn that that way, Chair. I very much sympathise with residents' concerns. I sympathise with what Councillor Carr said there about the inaccuracies and the uncertainty around the database. And I think this is one that's been going backwards and forwards. And I think that, quite frankly, probably the mechanisms and legislation is probably not tight enough. And that's why we keep having this problem. And I'd probably say as well that the department that's trying to do this and trying to keep all this in place is understaffed. I think most of us would probably agree with that. And as a result, it's an incredibly difficult thing for that database to be kept up to date. My thought is based on what we have in front of us, and we have to assume that everything that we've got here is correct to the best of everybody's knowledge. I really think we would struggle to not accept this. And I think Councillor Fisher's point is actually very important, that this property actually does then push us quite clearly past a threshold. And therefore, any subsequent HMOs in this immediate area, well, that will be a different story. But for this particular application here, with the information we have in front of us, I personally think it's very difficult for us not to support the officer recommendation. And therefore, I will move the officer recommendation.
Thank you. Is anybody willing to second that? Give people a second. If Councillor Crackhill.
Keeping this off because I find it hard to see so clearly with it on. Yeah, I just agree really that I think it's very difficult to refuse this. I appreciate it takes it slightly over the threshold, but it is very slightly. So I'd have to agree with the officer comments that, you know, it is still at this point until there is another application that comes forward, retaining the balance, which is the intention of the policy. And I would just like to say that Councillor Waters referred to the balance, you know, this happening in a residential street, but I do think it's worth remembering that people who live in HMOs are also residents. They're often students, but they're not always students. Sometimes they're people in professional employment or whatever, in all kinds of reasons why they're in HMOs. So it is about balancing the neighbourhood. And so I don't think we can refuse it, really.
Councillor Webb.
Thank you. I just want to correct or clarify one point you made there, Councillor Craggill. I wouldn't be approving this if it was above the 10%, but given the facts that we've got in front of us, which is 5 in 58, I think it's just below, I think. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that the information on the paper is what I'm going on. Now, I accept that Councillor Waters gave us an additional property or 3, but I can't confirm or prove or disprove that. I can only go on what's here. So that was my point.
Should I? Yeah. Maybe I think that's good.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. Just quickly, I mean, I was going to make similar points to Councillor Webb in a way, but I think if I can make a plea that, because this is a discussion that we have again and again and again and again and again, and I think we do need to find a way of resolving this issue so that there isn't this ambiguity around any suggestion that the figures that are put before us are not accurate. And I would just be sort of mindful of, you know, having sat through 3 hours of scrutiny on Monday night where we were talking about making decisions based on data that may be knowingly having gaps in it. It's not a good place for us to be as a council if we are questioning our own data, because we can only go on the data that is before us. So we either have to say we've done what we can to make sure the data is robust, and therefore that informs our decision, in which case the decision, I think I would completely agree with what Councillor Webber said, that it's currently below a threshold. This would take it very, very marginally above a threshold as to be acceptable to my mind, and therefore no other HMOs on that area, assuming nothing else changed, would be acceptable beyond that, because we would clearly then be over a threshold. But I do think we need to find a resolution to this sort of discussion that seems to happen on a fairly regular basis around HMOs, particularly in this part of the city.
Councillor Cracker, can I just double check that you were seconding? I think I might have missed you say.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I was seconding.
Thank you. Councillor Daubney, did you?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to second Councillor Webb's proposal, but obviously I've been beaten to it, so that's fine. Thank you.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. It is a tough one, because one thing you learn as a long time in politics is there are a lot of very honest people out there, but there's a fair proportion of people who are thoroughly devious and try to hide what they're doing. And this is the particular problem. If every HMO landlord would be honest and decent about it and actually declare the fact they are running an HMO, life will be a lot easier. But unfortunately, as we all know, some don't. And that's the difficulty our officers face, is trying to actually keep an up-to-date record when things are changing. I accept this does breach the limits, but the policy is clear that we won't approve any new ones if it's over 10% already. That's what the policy seems to me for the neighbourhood. So I think, on balance, I think I would find this very difficult to defend appeal if I were an officer, so I shall support approval of it.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further debate, then I'm happy to move to the vote. Gareth, if you're able to just give us a brief.
So move that planning permission be granted in line with the recommendation, with the suggested or the recommended conditions on page 20 and 21 of the agenda papers.
Okay, thank you. So if I could see then all those in favour of the proposal. All those against? That's clearly passed, so the application's been approved. Thank you, Willie. We'll need to take another quick 5-minute break, so if we could be back, say, just after 5:30. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Move on then to item 3C, which is 27 Bedale Avenue.
Thank you, Chair. This is a planning application for change of use from a dwelling house within use class C3 to a house in multiple occupation in use class C4. First image is the photograph of the property on the corner. It's extended to the side and rear, and has a garage stroke studio at the rear. It's the site and the floor plans. So as you saw then, it's a large property. At the moment, it has 1, 2, 3, 5 bedrooms. As I noted on the previous application, within the C4 use class, as members are aware, it could be occupied by up to 6 residents. So back to the photograph. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Any initial questions from the committee? Councillor Daw, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm assuming that because the house next door is also an HMO, it's not relevant to the application before us. We consider it on its own merits. Am I correct?
And on the face of it, I guess there's an issue of impact from if you're thinking about impact of an HMO on adjacent properties, then you could take into account that the next door one is an HMO. We don't, otherwise, yeah, you're right. It would be dealt with on its own merits.
Councillor Caution.
Thanks, Chair. I wasn't sure, and then I've seen the picture, and I think that have we had an application at this committee a couple of years ago for one sort of 3 or 4 doors up, and there was an issue. There was questions raised around parking for it, and I think the suggestion was that there was plenty of parking, and particularly this little side avenue here where there's a sort of cut through without necessarily any driveways or anything coming onto it was potentially going to be a place for overspill parking. And I'm hoping I'm not mixing up applications, but I'm just wondering if we've got any information about what the parking is like, whether that has had any impact, that the previously approved application has had any impact on parking. Because obviously if there is potentially up to 6 separate individuals who could stay here, it could have quite a significant impact if each of them has a vehicle.
I had the same feeling that I'd been there before when we first looked at this. I think it was a property on Tramley Avenue, but it was in the same sort of where there's that return street with no properties on it, and perhaps doubly confusing by the property we visited as a committee, the property next door, number 27, number 25, when that was proposed to be extended. So that was a scheme where members refused, and it was dismissed on appeal, I believe. But that was a pre-existing HMO. I don't have any details on that other scheme, and whether that there has been parking issues around that, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was looking at my phone. Was that 44 Tramby Avenue, which you can see just in the bottom left of the site map? Any further questions at this point? Can't see any, so I'm happy then to move on to Councillor Waters. I hope you can manage to rejoin us on the phone. So if you're able to let me know and make a start in your own time.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, an agenda correction, which I hope is not within my 3 minutes. Paragraph 1.3, the last point. The garage to the rear was converted some years ago to a tattoo studio. Part of my calling was the expectation that this would become another cash-generating bedroom, not as it's written. Right, so I'll start. This application provides another good example of how studentification works and progresses. Residential neighbours next to out-of-control student HMOs give up and sell up, and the student-let landlords move in, and the process just continues to the detriment of the wider community. Next to the application property is number 25 Bedale Avenue, which is in the same property company ownership. Some of you on this committee might recall, as you've recently discussed, the site visit in 2019, and I'll draw your attention to the conditions imposed with regard to bike storage and especially waste storage. After many months of piles of rubbish being dumped on the front yard, taking up one of the already tight parking spaces, and subsequently blowing down the street, much to the annoyance of residents week after week, lack of any interest by the property management company, and constant visits by neighbourhood enforcement officers, I found that despite a condition of planning approval at number 25 being provision of a bin store at the rear, ludicrously, there was no compulsion in the conditions to actually use it. I know that has been corrected with this application in paragraph 5.18. For even so, I have no faith in the effectiveness of management plans either from the applicant's side of things or the council's enforcement processes. Council tax-paying neighbours are just left to live with the problems. Leaving aside the percentage threshold of 11.1% that approval would create, and the officer's ridiculous assertion that it is not a material breach, indeed, it's fair to ask, what's the point of a 10% threshold? No, what I find the most ludicrous part of the planning officer's appraisal of this application, indeed what I find thoroughly unprofessional, is in paragraph 5.14. It's clear that 3 car parking spaces can't be provided within the curtilage of the property. I think 2 cars being parked on the front requiring independent thought by students to manoeuvre them would be beyond such people, as evidenced, I might add, by many similar such examples. For the officers to say this doesn't matter and the occupants can simply dump their vehicles in the street is another good indication as to why neighbours are always so strongly against the continuing spread of the suburban campus of York University that this council seems so happy to facilitate.
30 seconds.
In this last 30 seconds, I'd just like to draw your attention to, again, the council's database that you have discussed. It's woefully inadequate. The whole policy is woefully inadequate, and you really ought to take some time to study what other local authorities do with similar sorts of policies, most especially, I'm trying to think of the local authority that actually says that you can't have 2 HMOs in a row, you can't sandwich a council tax-paying property between 2 HMOs either, and there's many local authorities that do a shorter street-level calculation, which again helps the residents. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I'll just ask if the committee have got any questions at this point. I can't see any, so I'll thank you for your time again this evening, Councillor Waters. Thank you. The committee then have got any further questions for Gareth? Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. It is just on parking. On the site, it's just not clear from the picture in the pack what the parking is on site, because I can sort of gauge that you could get 2 cars on there, but that wasn't there. Could you just sort of clarify on site on that? Are we happy that we could get 3 vehicles? Because that's, again, I suppose, part of the concern.
The Google Street View shows in its current C3 occupation 3 vehicles parked on the front. We don't think it could be done independently. I guess it all depends on the size of the vehicle.
Could we just clarify that term independently? What you mean by
Well,
that?
anyone could turn up. The third 3 vehicles could be parked on the frontage, and anyone could go to a car and move it without someone else having to move their vehicle first. So the sort of thing that you do regularly as a family, but perhaps is more tricky when you're not part of a family and part of an HMO occupancy.
And just on that, when we're talking about parking spaces on site, is that part of the condition? So we've talked about the fact that you have a parking space per 2 bedrooms. Is being able to get out of that parking space independently part of the situation?
It's certainly the sort of thing that we have considered. I'm not sure it forms part of the SPD, but we have, for example, when dealing with planning applications for new HMOs and also for extending existing HMOs, it's something that we've looked at, and we've considered whether that sort of issue would be likely to cause a problem in the area. And with this one, if you were good at parking and the cars are small enough, I think you could get 3 cars in and manoeuvre them safely without having to, knock on one of the other occupants' door and ask them to move their car. But what we have done here is taken into account that side road, which it's not particularly well illustrated in the photograph, but it is illustrated on the papers, which doesn't have any properties looking into with access onto it apart from this application site. So it's as with all these things, it's not necessarily a perfect situation, but on balance, as a refusal reason, I don't think it would stack up. We would be able to defend it. Okay, and not providing 3 independent spaces on the frontage.
Is there supplementary, Councillor Fisher?
Yes, it's not a particular question, it's more of a as I recall, there was an application probably in late 2019, which was somewhere on Badger Hill, Thief Lane area, where the applicant applied for a conversion to an HMO. I think it was an extension of an extra bedroom, and it was refused by this planning committee, and it was then dismissed on appeal by the inspector on the grounds that you couldn't, the parking spaces were not sufficiently large for independent manoeuvring of vehicles or for opening of doors or unloading of luggage. Now the only difference in that case was, as I recall, there was no off-street parking available. It would have caused a major problem on the street. Whereas I suspect this may not hold up quite as well on the same argument, because there is the link road going through. So it's a tricky one when you've got this off-street parking. I mean, clearly I don't believe, having looked at the site, and I know it extremely well because I went to the site visit 25, that you could actually park 3 cars on there and get them on and off. I think one of them would be bottled in. It would be almost impossible to get it out without going and disturbing somebody else. So I think there is an issue with car parking, but I think our area falls down on the fact that there is on-street parking, which probably would be considered adequate by an inspector.
Okay. I don't know if there's any comment on that. Or... No. Okay. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. Probably the first part of my question is a similar theme to that, but in both parts, it's just about language and wording and just being absolutely clear about what exactly the policies say. So if I'm reading this correctly, if we're basing the parking issue on the Draft Control Local Plan 2005, I think, which is page 33, just paragraph 5.7, the first bullet point, refers to a maximum car parking standard of 1 car parking space per 2 bedrooms. So I just want to be clear about whether what we're asking for is a minimum of 1 parking space per 2 bedrooms, or that we can only ask for a maximum of 1 parking space per 2 bedrooms. Because if it's a maximum, then we wouldn't be able to ask for, or it would be okay not to ask for 3 parking spaces, because we could only ask for up to a maximum of 3 parking spaces, but we would be within our rights to say, actually, we're perfectly happy to just have 1 parking space. Similarly, when we're talking about approving it, HMOs in a street area, and I think, you know, this one is a little bit more over the threshold. I think the point that you made, Councillor Fisher, on the last one, where you know, to all intents and purposes, 10.3%, you'd round it down to 10%, whereas 11 point whatever it is percent is quite clearly beyond the 10%. But again, the policy, as I understand it as written, is that we would only refuse where the threshold of 10% had already been met. So actually, if there was 9.9% at the moment, you could still approve. It's only once the threshold has been exceeded that you would refuse. It's not that you can't approve something that takes it over the threshold. So again, just in terms of the language and understanding the policies on both of those points, if we could just be completely crystal clear, I think that would help committee.
The policy, the draft policy in H8, which of the emerging local plan, which I believe is the same policy as in the, or very similar to the policy in the SPD, does say that applications for the change of use from a dwelling house C3 to an HMO C4 will only be permitted where, and it says it is in a neighbourhood where less than 20% of properties are exempt from paying council tax or are recorded on the council's database as a licensed HMO, or benefit from planning permission or known to the council to be HMOs. And then that continues to the street level 10%, but it is the same wording, are exempt, which does suggest that it doesn't say would be. So that suggests that that's at the point where without the proposed dwelling. And I'm not sure we've been entirely consistent, and I do recognise that the report where it says it's a breach of the threshold does refer to that threshold with the proposed HMO added in. And I think we've, as a planning authority and probably as a committee, we've probably dealt with them in both ways.
But just for clarity, the policy as written is that if the threshold has already been breached, we refuse.
Yeah.
If the threshold has not yet been breached, we don't refuse. And that it's not, irrespective of whether once that has been approved, it doesn't matter that then takes it over the threshold, because the threshold was not breached at the point at which the application was put forward.
Yeah, the policy, I'd agree. The policy is written. That's the way to do it.
Okay, and then just on the parking one, because I think that's obviously also an important one here.
Yeah.
The policy as written is written from the perspective of that we as a planning authority can request up to a maximum of 1 parking space per 2 dwellings, not that we should expect, or I just want to understand in terms of where we might choose to approve or refuse. Is it reasonable or unreasonable, I suppose, based on what the policy says?
The parking guidance is within the 2005 local plan, and they are expressed as maximums. However, that is it's potentially contrary to MPPF policy, because the MPPF says maximum parking standards for residential and non-residential development should only be set where there's a clear and compelling justification that they're necessary for managing the local network or optimizing the density of development. So we kind of haven't gone through that process because we've not gone from a pre-MPF to a post-MPF local plan yet. So where does that leave us? Our most up-to-date guidelines set maximums. That wording may be contrary to the MPPF unless we could set a compelling case otherwise. I would say that the issue is probably best judged on its own individual merits. Knowing, for example, general levels of student car ownership and the conditions of the streets to take on-street parking in the vicinity.
Okay.
Not particularly helpful, I know, but there we are.
Thank you. Go to Councillor Crawshaw and then Councillor Perry.
Sorry, by all means jump in if you. I just had one further point of clarification, just around this tattoo studio. So presumably, if there is a tattoo studio, it has its own use class, and does the change of use for the dwelling house have any impact on the use class of the garage as it currently is? Because I think that the concern's been raised that by approving up to 6-bedroom, well, it's five bedroom HMO, that somehow the use of the garage may change as part of that change. So I just want to understand that.
The tattoo studio was granted permission with a personal permission. So it's this building here in the rear. So it's a personal permission for the then applicants and occupants, who I understand is still, or when the application was put in, was still the owner of the property. And the wording of that personal permission means that permission falls away, lapses, if the property isn't occupied by that named individual, in which case the studio would revert to being a domestic part of the domestic curtilage of the house, and it's included within the red line of the application site. There is a condition. I don't know why I was putting that on. There is a condition that says that condition 4 on page 37, the existing detached garage shall be retained for the parking of a minimum of 6 cycles. So at least part of it has to be retained for cycle storage. It probably wouldn't be a material change of use if the rest of it was occupied as a bedroom, but it would all be subject to that overarching 6. In terms of materiality, unless they would come back with another application, which would deal with on its own merits, then it shouldn't change the situation in terms of total occupancy.
Thank you. Councillor Parrott.
It was actually that question I was going to ask around that condition and whether or not it was reasonable for us to put anything stronger in to prevent future development of that garage site and to protect it as cycle storage. So I think you've probably already covered if it's within curtilage of the property, what they would have to do that. So thank you. I shouldn't have let Councillor Crawshaw go first.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. You said that the use of the garage as tattoo studio is personal. Now, this seems to assume that the person who does that is going to leave the property. What would happen if for example, he or she remained in the property, kept the use of the tattoo studio because they're entitled to do so, and then there wouldn't be any storage for 6 cycles?
I'd say that the condition 4 would take precedence.
Right.
because
Could we amend it to say, for example, or failing this, a further cycle store be provided?
Well, I think the circumstances seem to be very unlikely. I guess what you could.
Point being, this doesn't
You could
necessarily have to
link-
be students, does it? It could be.
No, it could be, you're absolutely right. It could be any multiple occupancy. You could put condition 4. I think it's worded the way it is because it's an existing building. But I guess I assume at the moment it's not laid out internally as a cycle store. So what you could do would be change the wording of condition 4 to require that it's fitted out for the parking of a minimum of 6 cycles and retained as such prior to first occupancy as an HMO, which means that it would, whilst the property is being used as an HMO, part of it would always have to be retained for cycle storage. And actually thinking it through, the planning, maybe that granting permission for the planning permission effectively extinguishes that personal permission anyway.
Right.
But I would state my job on that.
Okay. Any further questions? Can't see any, so if we're happy then to move into debate, if anybody would like to kick us off. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start the debate. Unlike the previous application where I thought the prominence of the property was a major factor, I'm afraid I can't see any reason not to go along with officer's recommendation on this one, despite the continuing question marks over the accuracy of the database. But I just want to say this, when we object to HMOs, we're not demonizing the residents of HMOs. What we're doing is criticizing the living conditions which we impose on both the residents of those HMOs and the neighbours by granting these applications. National housing policy since Victorian times has been all about reducing housing densities and increasing habitable space. HMOs seem to run counter to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that a proposal? Are you happy for it to be?
Yes, I'm happy to move. Yes.
Okay. Somebody willing to second that? Councillor Crawshaw?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I would echo the points made by Councillor Carr actually on in moving proposal, and I think with the same caveats as what we've said on the previous application around only being able to deal with the data as it's presented to us. So I'd be happy to second. Once we've concluded this item, I would like to make a proposal to committee about something that we might wish to do more generally. So if I could, when we come to the end of this item, just make that point, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further debate on this? Can't see any, so happy then to move to the vote. Gareth, if you could.
Chair, so the recommendation is resolved to the resolution is to grant planning permission, sorry, subject to the recommendation and the condition on pages 37 and 38 of the agenda papers.
See then all those in favour of the proposal?
Sorry, just apologies. Did we include the change to the condition there? Sorry, I was just drifting off looking at this. But
that's part of the.
Because I think that the just the tweak to the wording as was being discussed, my concern originally was that we might open the door to the garage to be not part of the change and possibly reused, but actually, as you suggested it, as being to be fitted out as a cycle store prior to occupation as an HMO, I thought was a good way of just being really clear that that was what we intended.
Sorry, I wasn't sure whether we actually went.
Yeah, no, we
whether
didn't
had
mention it,
to
and I
change
thought I should mention it and forgot to.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
Okay, so that's subject to the amendment of the wording of condition 4 to require that it is converted prior to the occupation of the premises as an HMO. Is that right?
I think you said fitted out as and converted as a cycle store prior to the occupation. Yeah. Assuming that the proposers have to do that.
Yeah. Agree. I should have made that one.
I'd taken it as that was what we were doing. Yep, I see then all those in favour of the proposal. That's unanimous then, so that's approved. Okay, thank you. Councillor Crusher, you've got something to say. I'm not sure where it falls under the sort of agenda if we come to a proposal for anything, but
I wasn't sure either, which is why I wanted to just mention it and just raise it. We have on previous occasion sent a request to scrutiny to look at a particular issue from this committee, and I wondered whether Councillor Waters raised the Ombudsman complaint, and there was a complaint, I believe, upheld by the Ombudsman that was around the database and how it's updated and how we manage it. And I'm just wondering whether we might ask the Housing Scrutiny Committee to look at the detail of that Ombudsman complaint and perhaps consider whether or not there's anything that scrutiny could do to help with this problem that we keep having around the way in which the data around HMOs is brought forward to this committee and the planning committee. And as I say, I'm happy to move that as a proposal if we think that that's okay to do. I'm happy to sort of take off my planning hat and put on my scrutiny hat and take it away as chair of scrutiny and go and speak to the chair of the Housing Scrutiny Committee as well. But I think it might be helpful just to have the weight of the committee to say, actually, yes, this would be useful to look at if we think there's something in there.
yeah, I can't see anybody disagreeing with that as a suggestion. Perhaps as chair and vice chair, we could write to the relevant scrutiny chair and suggest it as a topic. Councillor Webb.
Sorry, just on the same note, it's a plea really. The policy around HMOs is like 10% as a whole number and 20% as a whole number. And then like in paragraph 5.12, suddenly everything's in decimal places. And, you know, for example, it just suddenly starts to get quite tricky when we're quite close to those figures. So for example, we've got 8.9%, which actually that's 9% if we're using the standards. Either we're using 10s and 20s or we're using decimalisation. I don't mind which it is, but if the policy's whole numbers, then surely the numbers we're getting. So for example, below that, 70 out of 736 is 9.5%, but that's 10%. That's the two are the same thing when the policy is 10%. And whilst that doesn't make a difference in this particular application, we keep getting it where they are pretty tight and pretty close. And I know this is really pedantic, but actually, I think it would probably help, you know, us as a committee if we were dealing with whole numbers. And I'm not putting that as a proposal, it's more just as a point to make here that I think this one was actually quite tricky because of that. And it potentially invites members of the public, other councillors to try and pick holes in that. It's just something to mention. I thought I'd do it while we got a chance.
Okay, I suspect we'll be having a debate on HMOs at full council as well. So close the meeting there. Thank you.